One of the issues I've followed closely, actually, has been this Russiagate nonsense. And because I followed this Russiagate nonsense, and from the beginning I considered this to be nonsense, you can look back at the original videos of this channel, at the very least being extremely skeptical of it. When this went bust, when they got everything that they wanted, they got their Mueller investigation, and Mueller did not give them what they wanted. The operative question after that should be, how did this all start? There's been 3 years of a conspiracy theory saying that the president of the United States was taking instructions from Vladimir Putin. And the Democratic Party has used that as an attack point, has ran screaming to the hilt that this guy's a Russian plant, this guy's a Russian agent, that any of the Republicans that back him are also taking instructions from Putin or being useful idiots, Nunez in particular. And the IG report comes out, and it's all baloney. The intelligence services lied flagrantly and then released information out into the public in order to attack Trump. Now, the operative question that people like me ask, how did that happen? Was there any bias in the way that they went about their affairs? I mean, after all, you had Democratic operatives trying to get information leaked, meaning the embassy, onto, in order to hurt Trump, meaning Manafort, which did eventually get rid of Manafort. And in this situation, you have intelligence services spying on the Trump campaign, even when their predicate, the thing that they used, meaning the Steele dossier, was trashed. They went to Steele's own source, and Steele's own source told them Steele was full of shit. And they didn't let them know that. They didn't give them a heads up on that. They got 3 FISA warrants on Page. Even when the FBI found out he was a CIA asset, all of that information was hidden from the court, and in some cases just outright lied. They went from 10 fabrications to 17, maintaining the first 10, or I'm sorry, they went from 7 to 17, maintaining the first 7, meaning they flagrantly and continually lied. The operative question is why? Why would agents who supposedly know what they're doing on their jobs, who's spying on a presidential campaign, do they have political biases and political ideology within the context of the world? Meaning, from my standpoint, those are human beings that are doing a job. And those human beings that are doing a job are just like every other human beings. They have certain things about the world that they like and they dislike. And in this case, this taken high up as an investigation. Do the people involved in that process, was the reason that they made those decisions politically motivated? And whether that goes higher than that, whether that's multiple agencies' work, I want to know, how did they flagrantly fuck up this much? And was it a fuck up at all? Was it one of those situations where they had ideas of the world that Trump was a disaster, that Hillary Clinton was the second coming, and in the capacity of their jobs, yes, I'm going to continue to spy on them in case I could get something. And as I spy on them, yeah, we're going to leak information out to the press in order to ding this campaign. It is ludicrous, meaning Horowitz, to put out a case like this where people can read it and not come away with any reason or rationale of why they made those choices. Because that's what the IG report is. The IG report is basically, here are the events that took place, and here are all the flagrant abuses that took place in order for them to spy on one of the presidential campaigns. But we're not going to get into why they did it. We couldn't confirm anybody openly stating, screaming out of their windows, singing how they're going to get Trump. We didn't have that. And because we didn't have that, we can't come away with any determination on that. Fortunately, Barr is not held under those terms. And Barr, using John Durham, is looking criminally into why people did what they did. Barr, like me, rational human being, can't look at this and say that they were doing this for no reason. If indeed these are FBI agents who supposedly know what they're doing at their jobs and they don't do this flagrantly, I don't believe that. I actually believe they do it flagrantly. But despite the information they got back, that the rationale for the entirety of the investigation was bogus, they hid that and they kept going. And some of those people involved just so happened to be Clinton supporters, or at the very least thought Trump was the end of the world. But yeah, no bias. I'm not buying that. I want you to see Lindsey Graham cross-examine Horowitz, because this makes the point better than anything else. I'm not even going to show the entirety of the video, but it gives a strong impression on how Horowitz was looking as he did this report versus how a human being can look at a particular bit of facts and come away with, that looks dodgy, that needs to be investigated further because it seems like something mischievous was going on in that situation. Let's talk about Bill Barr and his investigation, or at the very least John Durham's investigation, and his perspective of the IG report. I love this. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support. PayPal, Patreon. I'm not going to keep this video long. I know this is not a big interest of everyone, but it's definitely an interest of mine. And so it is an issue that I follow. I just want to play a little bit of Horowitz being interviewed or cross-examined by Lindsey Graham. Democrats want to pretend like nothing to see here, folks. Nothing to see here. We shouldn't even be having this conversation. No, we absolutely should be having this conversation. You led this country into conspiracy theory for 3 years. The media networks propagated this conspiracy theory for 3 years. And agents in the intelligence services that immediately got jobs on these television agencies all of a sudden start leaking out information, attacking Trump. And not just that. Went with the notion that Steele wasn't the reason that the agents were looking into the case. All of this information, Brennan pretended as if he had secret information. And after all, why would you distrust him? He only worked for the CIA. The reality of it is, all of it was bupkis. They had squat. And despite having squat, they kept open an investigation on the President of the United States over and over and over again, continuing to get these warrants signed, in some cases, by Comey himself. Take a listen to this.
Nonsense. Christopher Steele, is it fair to say that he had a political bias against Donald Trump?
Given who he was paid for, there was a bias that needed to be disclosed to the court.
Does it seem that he personally had a bias, not just because he's on the payroll of the Democratic Party, but he...
Well, we found in the course of this and heard from Mr. Orr about his comment to him that he was desperate to prevent Mr. Trump's election.
Again, this is the guy that provides the dossier that gets the warrant over the top against Carter Page. He's paid for by the Democratic Party, and he personally believes it's bad for Donald Trump to win. He's marketing the dossier, which is a bunch of garbage, to anybody and everybody. To me, that's important. Is that important to you?
Any evidence of bias is supposed to be disclosed to the court and to the department lawyers.
Okay, so let's play this out. In January 2017, when they figure out the primary subsource and they talk to the Russian guy that provided Steele all the information, what should the FBI have done at that moment?
Two things. Reconsidered internally where things stood, and most importantly, told the lawyers at the Justice Department who they were asking to help them get a FISA.
And there are 5 people in that interview, right?
Correct.
Okay. Are you going to make sure those 5 people are known to the higher-ups?
They are all part of the referral that I mentioned earlier.
Okay. Did they have a duty to report to their supervisors and eventually to the court exculpatory information?
Absolutely.
They did not.
They did not.
Why?
That's the question I can't specifically answer for you.
Can you say it wasn't because of political bias?
On decisions regarding those FISA matters, I do not know their state of mind at this point.
Right there. When Horowitz is talking about this and he's saying there's no bias, he's not saying there's no bias. He's saying, I can't tell. I don't know. Now, some people have been using this to say that this, clears the FBI or the people in the higher ups of the FBI that were making the choices, or it does not. His point is, I don't know. I can't tell based on my investigation that there was clear bias. Many of the decisions that they were made are a mystery to me. Now, the catch becomes, if many of the decisions that they're making doesn't make sense to you, and yet it always goes towards a particular direction of trying to investigate, to spy on, to leak information on one of the campaigns, despite them knowing it's bupkis. How do you come away with that and say, it's a mystery to me? Now, you might say, I don't know this for certain, but yes, it looks like there was a clear bias in the way this was done, considering Christopher Steele, desperate to attack Trump in this race, shopping this dodgy dossier around anybody that'll take it. Clinton is paying for this, and yet the FBI is using this as a basis to spy on one of the campaigns. What is the political designation of the people who are doing this investigation? I mean, after all, Comey signed off on this. He clearly didn't like Trump. And many of the other people that were involved in this investigation, McCabe, Strzok, you already saw the leaked documents on them and the things that they were saying behind the scenes. But let's keep going. Just a little bit more.
So we're talking about actions now and trying to figure out what would motivate people. Do you think Comey...
My point is, by the way, if you're doing a real investigation, you can't assume that the people who were involved in that process were angels or good actors. And this notion of, oh shucks, they just made a mistake. How do you fabricate information mistakenly? And what was the political designation of the person that was fabricating that information in order to justify this investigation on Carter Page? What? Are you telling me that they had nothing going on in their heads from the standpoint of motivation? Ludicrous.
I mean, McCabe should have known?
That's a challenging question. Flows upstream.
Would you be surprised if it didn't make it up the system? Something this early in the warrant application.
So in the second and third
Report about the interview, they lied about it.
But let me add also,
Okay.
to not
So
know
they
that
did two
information.
things in January 20.
They did not.
I'm sorry, there's a specific point in the interview. Horowitz has a tendency to linger in the way that he talks, and so sometimes it gets a little dodgy and trying to get the very specific thing that I want him to say.
Tell the court or the department lawyers any of the information which would have allowed them to know that if you found the primary subsource credible, you couldn't have also found the Steele reporting credible.
Did they mislead the court?
That was misleading to the court and to the department to not
So
know
they
that
did two
information.
things in January 2017. They failed to report, obviously, exculpatory information. And when they did report to the court about the interview, they lied about it.
But let me add also
Okay.
that a year later, in June of 2018, when the department sent a Rule 13 letter to the court informing them of other information that had not been provided to the court, the department still didn't know about the primary subsource information. And so when the department in its letter said that it still stood behind the FISA applications,
Very interesting.
they referenced the primary subsource again and the fact that the FBI found that person credible.
So are these the best and brightest we have?
Well, certainly the FBI, the actions of the FBI agents on this were not
So
up to the
McCabe
standards of the FBI.
handpicks these people. Are they representative of the department as a whole, in your view?
I certainly hope that that is not the way others are following these practices.
Yeah, me too.
I hope you get his point. McCabe picks a group of people in order to head up a case, meaning even Barr says it himself, that essentially this wasn't an attack on the entirety of the FBI. And Barr even goes further and said the problem with this was that this wasn't handled, this was pulled up in the way that the investigation had taken place. Graham's point is this the best and brightest? Is this how all of these cases are handled? Or is there a political motive involved? And why did these agents take certain actions? Why did they make these fabrications? And why Were they spying on a campaign? If the only thing that they were doing were following the law and looking for what's taking place, how did they continuously get FISA warrants over and over and over to spy on the Trump campaign if there wasn't some ulterior motive that went beyond just following the law? What's the other motive? What's the other motive? Because if you're following the law, your exit route is after you find out that that CEO is full of shit. This is Barr. Barr's talking about this. This is a really good interview, actually, with cross-examining Horowitz, because it really gives you a clear picture on the reality of this, and even how Horowitz is thinking about this, and the reason that he come up with no bias. He only comes up with no bias because he can't make a determination definitively. And it seems like his standard is screaming out of the window that you want to take down Trump. That standard is a little too high, buddy. This is Barr having a conversation about this in an interview. Listen to what Barr is saying. Barr is thinking about this in a way that I'm thinking about this, that you shouldn't give a pass on this notion of sloppiness or incompetence. That bias could be an actual motive, and you need to look into whether or not it was. This is our democracy we're talking about. This is not whether or not it's Trump or anybody else. This is a big fucking deal.
Jim Comey came out after you gave your last interview. You responded to the IG Horowitz's report and spoke out about that. And then he spoke with Chris Wallace, and he said that the 17 mistakes and omissions that were uncovered in the FISA process he attributed it to sloppiness, largely. What do you say to that?
I think there's some of them very hard to square with the idea that these were just mistakes and sloppiness. I have said that a number of these episodes leave open the possibility of inferring bad faith or improper motive, but I hasten to add that, as I've said all along, that I've reached no determination on that, nor do I think a final determination on that is appropriate until all the evidence is in. The Horowitz himself, in his testimony, I think pretty well summed it up, which is this could be, on the one hand, at the very least, gross incompetence. On the other hand, it could also be improper motive. And he was not in a position to make that call, and that's why we have the U.S. Attorney John Durham looking into this.
Yeah, and I want to ask you more.
I hope you understand what he means. He's right. In some of the cross-examination, where the Republicans were questioning Horowitz, he was very clear. Look, I'm not saying that there was no bad faith in this. I'm not saying that there wasn't an improper motive. I'm just saying I can't determine if there was. The reason why I showed you the Lindsey Graham one, because I wanted to give you this idea of how Horowitz was looking at this. Let's keep going.
More about that in a moment. Are you surprised that James Comey is so convinced himself that...
But that's an irresponsible statement.
He said that you made an irresponsible statement about these FBI individuals.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I made the same statement effectively and substantively as the Inspector General, which is there are unexplained misconduct that it just can't be easily explained as to what was going on there. And as he said, it could involve bad motive, and he was not in a position, given the limited scope he has, of making that final determination. So it's not speculation, but I think there are episodes there that simply cannot be squared with innocent mistakes, and I think people have to come to terms with that.
Were you surprised that he seemed to...
I think there are episodes there that just cannot be squared with innocent mistakes, and I think people need to come to terms with that. Why do people need to come to terms with that? They need to come to terms with that because he's running a criminal investigation, and Durham, if he starts bringing out names, and by the way, not just over the FBI, over it all. His mandate is over all of these various intelligence services, FBI, CIA, whatever, alphabet soup, anything that was involved in this particular election, especially from the standpoint of creating this conspiracy theory. All of them. In fact, I think he even talks about this, 1052. And yeah, people do need to come to terms with that, especially if bad motive is determined within the context of this investigation. And I got to be honest, I have no idea how you come away with something that doesn't come up with bad motive. Because ultimately, if you're a Democrat, you need to explain why the intelligence services if they were indeed looking at Trump-Russia stuff, and they found out that the Steele dossier was dodgy and nonsense, why did they keep going? What was their motivation beyond, quote unquote, the law for them to continuously spy on this particular campaign? Not to mention the FISA thing needs to be done away with in general. But let's
on
last
that
question.
in terms of how that's going, or what the time frame is when we can expect to see that report?
Well, he's moving, very diligently. I'm not involved in the day-to-day work of that. I know in just a general sense what they're looking at, and otherwise it's his investigation, and he runs it as he sees fit. And I haven't given him any timelines, and we haven't discussed a timeline as to when he thought it would be complete. But just my general, there were people who expected it to come a week or two after Horowitz's report. And just based on my general knowledge of the things he's looking at and has to look at in the future, I wouldn't think that he'd be in a position for quite a few months.
And it's a criminal investigation. There are criminal investigation elements to it.
Yes.
Do you know if he has spoken?
It has to be. It has to be. How could it not be? The FISA court, they call it a court. They might as well call it the FISA rubber stamp. For the most part, that thing can be, 99.7% of the cases that come up to that are deemed valid. Meaning it's a rubber stamp. You can investigate a ham sandwich if you wanted to investigate a ham sandwich and get a FISA warrant to do so. That's how much of a rubber stamp that thing is. But there's still rules. One of those rules is you can't lie to the court. You don't have a defense attorney there making the case for the opposition. In fact, it's a secret court. So within this case, the person who's sitting across in order to issue that warrant, you have to tell that person everything there is supposedly about it. And supposedly it is against the law to lie to the FISA court. But based on the IG, they have been lying flagrantly to the FISA court. Now the FISA court comes out on this and rebukes the FBI for this. Why? Because they look bad. Yes, we're a rubber stamp, but we're not a doormat. We're just a rubber stamp. And if you're going to make us look bad, we're going to say something about it. So they put out a public statement rebuking the FBI over the behavior that was disclosed in the IG report. But it's supposed to be against the law to do what these agents did. So it has to be a criminal matter, almost by definition. I'm just saying, it's one thing to make a mistake. It's another thing to flagrantly and deceitfully lie in order to maintain spying. Yes, it's a criminal matter. It has to be.
In with John Brennan or James Clapper, Andrew McCabe, are they included in that investigation?
I'm actually not following it closely to know who he's talking to at any
Would you
given
expect that they would be included based on the leadership issues that you've brought up, that you have brought up at the intelligence agencies?
I don't want to speculate about how he's going to take the investigation.
So we really learned a lot about the FISA abuse situation in the Inspector General's report. Do you believe that Durham's investigation is broader scoped in terms of the intelligence agencies that are being looked at?
Oh, yes. He's not just looking at the FBI. He's looking at other agencies and also private and departments and also private actors. And so it's a much broader investigation. And also, he's not just looking at the FISA aspect of it. He is looking at all the conduct, both before and after the election.
So would that include the CIA, NSA?
It would include agencies that could have been involved in this, but we're getting a lot of cooperation from those agencies. You have to.
If this is a real investigation, then yes. Now, the catch here is, if my name is Donald Trump, and I honestly believe that it seemed a cabal of people, be it with coordination with the party or maybe without, maybe just themselves just thought we need to hold back the night. But something took place where there was flagrant spying on a campaign using lies in order to come up with this kind of governmental fig leaf in order to do it. That comes out and that becomes clear. You have to investigate that to figure out whether these guys were just flagrantly, obscenely incompetent, or whether there was persistent, intentional spying on that campaign in order to hurt that campaign. You also need to figure out whether that was connected to any of the parties, since the parties would have a clear interest in doing what just took place. You even have to look at the Ukraine issue. Democratic operatives working with the Ukraine in order to ding his candidate, Trump. If I am Trump, one of my instructions to Bill Barr when I hired him to do the job would be, I need you to investigate the election. Now, the catch here is, if it's an honest investigation, it will be hard to throw away. He's still the Attorney General. They want to pretend that Trump is not president. Trump is president. Barr is the Attorney General, and for whatever his faults, I would say that if I'm Trump, the guy who I put in would be to some degree motivated by my interests. And this particular thing, I want a clean, honest accounting of what took place, especially if I think something actually took place. Meaning, in this case, truth is a weapon. It's one of those things where you could be fantastically corrupt, but you could still hit something that's pay dirt that just so happens to be true. A conspiracy theory tried to take you out of office, and I want you to investigate the origins of that conspiracy theory. Barr puts Durham, somebody who's widely respected, who is not a dodgy prosecutor, and is put out to give an honest accounting. The catch here is, you may put an honest guy out if you think an honest accounting is going to show your adversary was doing something they had no business doing. I support this investigation 1,000%. A conspiracy theory nearly toppled the government, and whether you like Trump or dislike Trump, do you honestly want the intelligence services doing this? I mean, literally working with one of the campaigns to attack one of the other campaigns, and you're looking at this and saying there's no bias in the situation at all. The entire basis of the investigation was based in bias. The Steele dossier that was being bought. And don't get me wrong, there were multiple investigations. You had people, honeypots, trying to get Papadopoulos. You had Halper, who was spying on the Trump campaign using Papadopoulos. All of this needs to be investigated because this is a horrible precedent. This is a horrid precedent. I support this investigation 1,000%. Whatever Bill Barr's faults are, hopefully getting to the bottom of this is not one of them. I want to know. And if you're one of those people that thought Trump, Russia, and need to be investigated and everything else, you should too. Just to put a finer point on it, this is Glenn Greenwald. Right here. The first FISA warrant to spy on Page was obtained during the 2016 election after Page had left Trump campaign, but weeks before the election was to be held. The IG report, in its own words, found that the FBI personnel fell far short of the requirement in the FBI policy and to ensure that all factual statements in the FISA applications are scrupulously accurate. Specifically, we identified multiple instances in which factual assertions relied upon the first FISA application were inaccurate, incomplete, or unsupported by appropriate documentation based on information the FBI had in its possession at the time the application was filed. This includes, again, Carter Page being an asset of the CIA. And to make this one was that much more special because when Carter Page came out and started saying that he was working with the CIA, he's not a member of the CIA, they tried to get information on this, and the information was forged that he was not working with the CIA, meaning they lied and changed information. Now, I don't know how that is a mistake. And when Graham asked him what was in his head, why did he do that? And he said, I don't know, we couldn't determine that. Graham pointed out, did it have anything to do that this guy was an out-and-out Trump is going to end the world guy? And he says, I don't know. This is my point about the IG Horowitz. If you remember, Horowitz is the same guy that did that report on the Clinton investigation and came back and saying no bias. Same guy. Nobody was singing in the rain that we wanted to take down Trump. So I can look at all of these items and say no bias. That's Horowitz. That's the same guy. And he effectively did what he did on the Clinton investigation into Comey's actions, that type of stuff with the investigation into Clinton. He did what he did there, here. Essentially putting out a BS title while actually putting out real information that shows the truth of the situation. And Graham did a good cross-examination here. I'll end this. I'm following this. I'm always annoyed with Horowitz for that very specific reason. This no bias stuff bugs the shit out of me. I'll end it here, though. That boys, Horowitz is a swamp creature, nothing more and everything less. Whoa, no. Whatever you want to think of Horowitz, read the report. He puts damning stuff in those reports. The only issue here is Horowitz usually put a title on it that makes it look like, or summary, like nothing to see here. The problem is, if you read the report, there's a lot to see there. And this cross-examination by Lindsey Graham is kind of my point. He's answering Graham's questions. He's not lying. He's just being to the letter of the law in what he says. He's being very specific in what he says. The problem here is that this is horrendous testimony.
Okay, so let's fast forward now to June
one more.
of 2016. Mr. Kleinsmith, who's he?
In the Office of General Counsel at the FBI, who was and said to the news media, I was someone who worked with U.S. intelligence agencies, not someone who worked against them. Lawyers and agents went and said, we've got to figure out what's the story. Is that what happened, that Mr. Page was or is someone who had a relationship with the entity, with the other government agency, but that the lawyer should go look at the report.
If Carter Page was actually telling the truth, it changes one of the predicates to consider him a foreign agent.
That was the concern of the agent,
Yeah.
and it was the agent who was going to be swearing out.
If
complaint.
true, it would be helpful to Mr. Page.
It certainly could have and may well have been very helpful to Mr. Page.
Okay.
But it's at a minimum, without any doubt, it should have been known, it should have been followed up on, and it should have
Well, what
been
did this
told
lawyer
people
do?
at the FBI. When the lawyer had the discussion with the agent, and the agent said, I want to see it, do you have it in writing? The lawyer said he did, and he forwarded the liaison's email, but altered it to insert the words "and not a source" into the email.
So he
went-
doctored it.
He doctored the original email from the liaison.
It made it look like the CIA denied knowing Mr. Page.
It flatly stated that he was not a source.
Okay, now just imagine, folks. You're representing somebody as a defense attorney and they do this to one of your clients. I hope somebody pays a price for this, whether you like Trump or not. So why did Mr. Kleinsmith, that's who we're talking about, you don't have to say it, I'll say it. What motivated him to do that?
It is unknown as to precisely why he did it, but we
This is the
cite.
Viva la Resistance
Right.
guy.
I was going to mention but we reference in here
Yeah.
This guy, like you said, this is the Viva Resistance guy. Hey, what motivated this guy who was a resistance guy to change the documentation that way to make it look like Carter Page, like literally forge a document to make it look like Carter Page wasn't working with the CIA? What would make that guy do it? Horowitz, like, I don't know. I have no clue. We could not ascertain a motive one way or the other. It's like, but this guy's a Viva Resistance guy, right? This guy's a never Trumper. But we don't know if there was bias here. This is how he's doing this bias nonsense. It's like, I can't tell under any circumstances what's going on if there is bias, even if I have knowledge that the person outside of the organization hates Trump. Even if I know he hates Trump. He never said anything in documentation. He never wrote down, fuck Trump, in legal documents while he was working in the government. So I don't know if there was bias. Yes, whatever you think of Trump, Bill Barr in this is doing God's work. And I support him in this very specific effort. And I damn sure support John Durham looking into this as a criminal investigation. Like I said, this is an issue of what type of government do you want? And do you want intelligence services potentially even working in coordination with one of the other parties to ding your candidate, whoever that candidate is. This could be Bernie fucking Sanders. Understand what I'm saying? Especially if he's going in with a foreign policy that he's talking about going in with. You don't think the other Democrats would work with intelligence services to ding Sanders? I don't know why you wouldn't think that. If they'll do it to Trump, they'll do it to Sanders. Bill Barr, God's work. This may be the first time in his entire history that he's getting called for this point, but I support this 1,000%. And Amaxa, it can be both incompetence and bad motivations that could be considered criminal. You can be stupid and a bad person. Yes, you could be. They put people in prison all the time for being stupid or doing things that they didn't necessarily know were bad. If you remember, Comey's argument for Clinton was that she was incompetent. She was incompetent. She made bad mistakes, but that didn't meet the level of criminal behavior. I'll end this here. Marcus Will, how does Biden versus Trump debate fare? Will Trump mysteriously forget Bernie push for impeachment? Oh, that's a dick move. That's a dick comment. But fair enough, sir. Fair enough. How does the Bernie versus Trump debate fare? Will Trump mysteriously forget? Oh, I'm sorry. Bernie versus Trump. Would Trump mysteriously forget Bernie pushed for impeachment and Russiagate? Interesting. Technically, impeachment has not taken place yet. And we don't know if it will ever take place. Nancy Pelosi is required to send those items, the articles of impeachment, over to the Senate. Until they are sent to Senate, nothing has taken place. So will Trump forget that he was impeached? Well, technically he wasn't impeached. If he is impeached, will Trump forget it? No. But I don't necessarily know if that's a weapon to use against Sanders on this front. I don't necessarily know if he gets so many votes per se. It's 50-50 on whether people think Trump should be impeached. So I don't necessarily know if that gets some bang for his buck. Maybe to some degree, but people consider that politics. Will he forget that he pushed Russiagate? No, he will not. He will not. And whatever you want to think, it is a perfect, legit weapon for Trump to use this notion of these guys impeached me and this guy was pushing Russiagate in his attacks on Sanders. That is a fair hit. I don't see why it's not. I don't see why it's not a fair hit. So Marcus Will, yes. Fair enough, sir. Fair enough. Well, they took they took the vote, but supposedly, technically, at least based on what Bloomberg magazine is saying, that it's not impeachment until Pelosi sends the articles over to the Senate. When she sends the articles over to the Senate, at that point, the impeachment has taken place and the Senate can now evaluate what they're going to do in regards to the trial. But this is a technicality, of course, and people always consider impeachment the moment that you take the vote. This is unprecedented also. There may be a little bit of delay for something that might have taken place, but not a flagrant, intentional, not sending over the articles. That's different. That's new. Sending the articles is not a requirement. Order of chaos. All right, I have to look that up then. Bloomberg might have been wrong on that. I'll look it up. I will look it up. So I need to fact check myself on that. But as far as I know, impeachment hasn't taken place. All right. Can't Pelosi hold it till the Senate if Democrats take the majority in the Senate? Yeah, but at that point, Trump will be out of office. Meaning the next Senate thing, even if you got impeachment, you still have to wait till she gets her new Senate. And the new Senate won't take place, or will take place at the point, if I'm not mistaken, at the point where Trump leaves. I mean, Trump is leaving anyway at that point if he loses. I mean, what does it matter? All right. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks all. And I'm going to fact check myself about the impeachment thing. So, just saying. Like, share, subscribe.